Open your psalm books, number 139. 139. We're going to sing all 4 verses of that, get Buddy to lead us in a prayer after that, and then we'll have our Bible class. Into the heart of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, seeking to know the reason why he should love me so, why he should stoop to lift me up from the miry clay, saving my soul, making me whole, though I had wandered away. Into the heart of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, praying for grace to follow, seeking his way to know, bowing in full surrender, low at his blessed feet, bidding him take, break me and make, till I am molded and meet. Into the cross of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, following through the garden, facing the dreaded foe, drinking the cup of sorrow, sobbing with broken heart. Oh, Savior, help, dear Savior, help, grace for my weakness impart. Into the joy of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, rising with soul in rapture, far from the worldly low, joy in the place of sorrow, peace in the midst of pain. Jesus will give, Jesus will give, he will uphold and sustain. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we're again thankful for this time that we have to assemble together and to open up your holy word. Father, we are thankful for this congregation, thankful for all that have assembled here this evening. Father, we are mindful of those that are not able to assemble with us, and we pray for them, Father. We pray you would be with them and to help them to feel better. Father, we are thankful for this congregation. Father, we pray your blessings upon it. We pray, Father, that as we open up your word this evening, that you would help us to rightly divide your word, to understand your will, and be prepared to make application in our lives. Father, we pray that you would give us grace and mercy. We pray, Father, for forgiveness of those things that we have done that would trespass in your word, and the things that we have left undone, Father. We pray, Father, that you would be with us to strengthen us. We pray, Father, that you would help us to see the things that tempt us and be prepared to overcome those things. We ask, Father, that you go with us now as we begin this study. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay. Okay. Last week we began looking at this lesson book
David through the eyes of others. It is really a study of our heart and the condition that our heart is in. So it starts off with God's view of David, and we'll finish that lesson up. And generally, we're going to try to cover a lesson next week. The lesson is a giant, talking about Goliath's view of David. And then we've already made a lot of comparisons about King Saul, but that's going to be in there too as well. All right. So we got down to number 3 on page 2 in the lesson book. So we're looking at what God looks at when he sees our heart. So I guess by way of review, when God saw David's brothers, what did he say to Samuel when Samuel looked at David's oldest brothers, Eliab, and thought, man, surely the Lord's anointed is standing right here in front of me? What did God say to him? God looks at the heart. He said, don't take note of his stature, for I have rejected him. So you can think about people who have various qualities that are attractive, and by that I don't mean romantically. I mean they have charm, or they have charisma. They just have a power that draws people to want to be like them, to follow them, to be friends with them, to admire them, to respect them, things like that. You could talk about many qualities. They say that people who are better looking get better service than people who are not as attractive to other people. I guess that's been shown in a number of studies, so it's probably true. We know generally that people who dress better, dress really nice, drive big cars, live in big houses, are viewed by many people, I don't know if you say most people, by many people differently than somebody that's living in a box on the street. And so we have to, as Christians, ask ourselves from time to time, do I ever do that sort of thing? Am I looking at the outward appearance of a person and I'm making a decision about that person? Sometimes there are Christians who will look at a person who maybe they don't have nice clothes. Maybe they don't have a place to get a bath or a shower. Maybe they don't have a lot of money, so they're not, maybe they're thin and maybe a little gaunt because they just don't have a good diet. They can't afford the same quality of a diet that a wealthier person can afford. And we look at that person and we might make judgments about that person. As a Christian, we need to be careful to fight against that. That's not what we should do. Now, we might look at that person and say, well, here's an opportunity for me to help someone and to show them kindness and compassion and the love of God. That doesn't mean that a rich person doesn't ever need help either. And there are some people who have, when they might see somebody that, well, the guy may have long hair, he may have tattoos or something like that, and that's just different background than we've been at, and we look at that person and they'll never really be interested in the gospel. He's a worldly man, He likes the nightlife. He likes going to parties, or maybe he's had that reputation in the past. Maybe you know a little bit about him. We need to be careful about the judgments we make based upon the outward appearance of a person. What's the old adage about a book? Don't judge a book by its cover. That's right. So when you can, try to get to know someone. If you don't have a chance to get to know someone, try to at least have an open mind about them. Now, I'm not saying we should sweep sin under the rug, but we should generally have I'm not sure trusting or positive are the best terms even. We should care about other people, and we should look for the good in other people, but not be blind to the sin. So we're not sweeping sin under the rug and pretending it's not there, but everybody knows it is. We're being honest about that person, but we're trying to give that person the benefit of the doubt. That's what the expression of the benefit of the doubt is that we don't have any reason, any real solid reason to believe bad about him. So we should not imagine it in our minds. All of that there are ways in which we sometimes judge others by their outward appearance. If I were to ask for a show of hands of all of us who have met someone who you did not have a favorable impression of when you first met them, but over time they won you over, I think every hand would come up, because all of us have met somebody like that. It may have been my fault. It may not have been my fault. Maybe he gave me some reasons to doubt his sincerity when I first met him. But he reached a point in which he turned, in my mind, in my understanding, he turned his value system, his direction around, in my mind at least, if not in his life, maybe in his life too. And I know better about him now. And so all of us have met that. So Jesus says, God said to Samuel, I've rejected him. Don't even pay attention to that, because God sees, as Rose said, God sees our heart. Now, that's something we need to think about. So when God sees me, he doesn't see an aging man with a white beard and no hair on his head. He doesn't see that. He isn't even what he sees. And that's probably a good thing. So he sees into the heart. My wife, okay, she sees past those things too, because hopefully after 45 years, she's had a chance to get to know the fellow that's inside. And so we need to ask ourselves, what's God see when he's looking at me? Is he seeing somebody that's trying to play both sides? I'm trying to be spiritual and godly, but I'm trying to have as much fun in the world as I can. And even if sometimes that means I compromise with the moral values that the Bible teaches, or I'll tell a little white lie or something like that. God sees every bit of that. Nothing escapes God's notice. And so we need to think about what God sees. Now, God understands that life is hard. I think it's the 108th Psalm where it says that God knows our frame, that we are dust. God understands that it is hard to live in this life. And the reason Jesus suffered in this world was not so God would find out what it's like. I think God already knew what it was like. But so that we can be certain that we know Jesus understands. It's hard. It's difficult. And so God is patient. You remember the statement that Paul made to Timothy, that because he was sincere when he was in sin, he did terrible things, that because he did it in ignorance, God was patient with him. Now, does ignorance excuse your sin? No. But God is often, I think I probably could say more than often, but God is patient with those who are struggling, even in ignorance. Even if you look and say, well, he should know better. He should have, he's 40 years old, and he's had time to study his Bible, but he's just neglected all of that. I know there's some people in life who have very steady lives. One day is pretty much like the other, and they're in a good shelter, and they have not a bad life day after day. But there are some people who are grappling with burdens that really it's one thing after another. And so we need to recognize that God sees all of that, and he often is patient with us. So when Saul was anointed, we talked about in question 2, when Saul was anointed, he was very humble, very hesitant, didn't think of himself as a ruler. But he cozied up to his position pretty fast. You real quickly, you see that Saul is jealous of any rival. And David very quickly became a rival after he killed the giant. So Saul, of course, was head and shoulders above every other person, every other man in Israel. So he was really a fine specimen to look at. And, I don't really blame Samuel when he saw Eliab. He's standing in front of this guy who's very Saul-like in his stature, very much like Saul. So this is who God picked before, and maybe he's picked another one that looks a lot like him. But again, I'm thinking And aren't you that God picked Saul at that time because he was humble? When a person is humble, I've talked a lot about when you come to God and you want to receive wisdom from God, you got to make sure you're empty of your own ideas. You can't put anything in a full glass. So humility is the metaphor for a person who is humble is he's emptied himself, right? That's a good metaphor for how you would define someone who is humble. He's emptied himself of his own ideas, his own notions, his own think-sos, and he's ready to listen. You remember what Cornelius said to Peter? He said, we're all gathered here at this time together to see what God has to say to us. He's all ready. His mind is open. And, of course, his mind was so open that he was ready, unbeknownst to him at the moment when Peter began preaching, to receive the Holy Spirit before that sermon was over and to demonstrate to the Jews that God was going to accept the Gentiles. So question 3 asks, rather than physical characteristics or military prowess, what was God looking at when he selected David? Now let's turn over to 1 Samuel 13. 1 Samuel chapter 13. Somebody read verses 13 and 14.
Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, "How long?"
Are you in 1 Samuel?
Isn't that 1 Samuel? What 1 Samuel 1?
It'd be 1 Samuel chapter 13.
Oh,
That's okay. 13. Let me see. Wait a minute. Yeah. 1 Samuel 13 and 14.
And Samuel said to Saul,
Yeah.
You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you.
Okay. So this is after Saul offered an unlawful sacrifice. He was supposed to wait for Samuel to come, and Saul decided to go ahead and offer the sacrifice anyway. And so God said, I'm going to seek after someone who is a man after God's own heart. Do you think about that expression? What is another circumstance in which you might compare when a person is after another heart? I guess I kind of gave it away there, but you think of any other circumstances where that might happen? Yeah. You are wooing the person that, and most of the time it's the guy chasing the girl. And there's no wonder. That's the way God made men and women. And it doesn't mean that women can't be the one who may be more in pursuit. It's not necessarily wrong necessarily, but when you're pursuing that person, you always, when you get dressed, when you choose what cologne or perfume or, you maybe many things that you will choose with that person in mind. You like the car, but you wonder if she'll like the car or if he'll like the car. And you think about those things. And, I remember my parents used to complain because I would stay hours on the phone. Nobody else was using the phone. It's the only phone in the house, of course, back in those days. And you can stay on the phone for a long time. Kids today like to text. They got a phone, they can talk, but they'd rather text for hours and hours. And so those are little signs that this person is pursuing the other. And of course, if we are a person after God's heart, there are going to be some similarities. We're going to try to learn everything we can about what God desires. And then I started to say what God likes. I don't mean in terms of what God's favorite color is or what food. We're not talking about that. We're just trying to person we ought to be, and God can help us understand what that is, and then God will be pleased with us. See, God